In the ancient tapestry of Greek thought, woven long before the first stone of the Parthenon was laid, there was no beginning in the way we understand it today. Instead, there was chaos. Not the chaos of disorder, but a vast, yawning chasm, a primordial void that existed before anything else. Imagine a space utterly without form, without light, without sound, a profound, endless emptiness that was, paradoxically, the source of all being. This concept, often attributed to early Greek cosmogonies like those found in Hesiod's Theogony, composed around the 7th century BCE, posits chaos as the very first entity from which everything else emerged. From this boundless void, the first primordial deities, the protogenoi, spontaneously arose. Gaia, the earth, emerged first, a solid, nurturing foundation in the midst of nothingness. Her presence brought stability, a tangible ground upon which existence could begin to unfold. Then came Tartarus, the deep abyss beneath the earth, a dark and gloomy realm, as far below Gaia as the heavens were above her. And Eros, the principle of love and procreation, also stirred from chaos, a fundamental force that would drive creation and connection throughout all time. Some traditions also name Erebus, the deep darkness, and Nyx, the night, as children of chaos, blanketing the nascent world in shadow before light could truly dawn. Gaia, the broad-breasted earth, lonely in her vastness, spontaneously gave birth to Uranus, the starry sky, a being equal to herself in size who would cover her completely. She also brought forth Aurea, the towering mountains, and Pontus, the restless sea. With Uranus stretched above her, a celestial canopy glittering with nascent stars, the world began to take on form and dimension. Uranus, the sky, then coupled with Gaia, the earth, and their union marked the true beginning of the divine lineage that would shape the cosmos. Their first offspring were beings of immense power and formidable appearance, known as the Titans. There were 12 of them, 6 male and 6 female. The males were Oceanus, the vast river that encircled the world; Coeus, the titan of intellect and the axis of the heavens; Crius, the pillar of the south; Hyperion, the titan of light and observation; Iapetus, the titan of mortality and craftsmanship; and Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious, the titan of time and harvest. The females were Thea, the titaness of sight and glitter; Rhea, the titaness of motherhood and fertility; Themis, the titaness of divine law and justice; Mnemosyne, the titaness of memory; Phoebe, the titaness of bright intellect and prophecy; and Tethys, the titaness of fresh water. These titans were not merely gods, but elemental forces, embodying aspects of the nascent cosmos. Hyperion, for instance, was the father of Helios, the sun; Selene, the moon; and Eos, the dawn, illuminating the world that was still taking shape. Oceanus and Tethys gave birth to countless river gods and ocean nymphs, populating the waters of the world. Each titan played a role in the unfolding order, yet their father, Uranus, harbored a deep fear of their immense power. Uranus, fearing that his children would one day usurp his authority, committed an unspeakable act. As each of his offspring was born, he would seize them and thrust them back into Gaia's womb, imprisoning them within the very earth from which they had sprung. Gaia, groaning under the weight of her imprisoned children, suffered terribly. Her heart ached with the pain of their confinement, and she yearned for their release. She plotted with her children, whispering to them from within her depths, urging them to rise against their tyrannical father. Only Cronus, the youngest and most daring of the Titans, answered her call. He was a cunning and ruthless deity, already possessing a keen sense of ambition. Gaia fashioned a sickle from the sharpest flint, or, in some accounts, from the very iron within her own body, and gave it to Cronus. She instructed him to lie in wait for his father. One evening, as Uranus descended to couple with Gaia, covering her completely as he always did, Cronus, hidden, sprang forth. With the sharp sickle, he castrated his father, severing his genitals and flinging them into the sea. The act was brutal, a shocking moment of cosmic violence that reverberated through the primordial world. From the blood that splattered onto Gaia, the earth, sprang forth the Erinyes, the Furies, vengeful goddesses who punished those who committed patricide or broke sacred oaths. Also born from this blood were the Gigantes, powerful giants, and the Melii, the ash tree nymphs. From the foam that gathered around Uranus's severed genitals as they floated upon the sea, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was born, rising fully formed and radiant from the waves. With Uranus overthrown, Cronus ascended to power, becoming the king of the Titans. He released his siblings from their earthly prison, and together they established their dominion over the cosmos. The reign of Cronus was a period of immense power for the Titans, but it was also marked by a continuation of the cycle of fear and tyranny. Cronus, having overthrown his own father, was haunted by a prophecy that he too would be overthrown by one of his own children. This fear consumed him, leading him to repeat the very act he had punished his father for. As his wife, Rhea, bore him children, Cronus, in a desperate attempt to defy fate, swallowed each infant whole as soon as they were born. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, each was consumed by their father, disappearing into his vast maw. Rhea, a loving and sorrowful mother, was heartbroken by the loss of her children. She pleaded with Cronus, but his fear was absolute. When her sixth child, Zeus, was about to be born, Rhea sought the counsel of her parents, Uranus and Gaia. They advised her to hide the infant. So, when Zeus was born, Rhea secretly spirited him away to the island of Crete. There, she entrusted him to the care of the nymphs and the Curetes, warrior dancers who would clash their spears against their shields to drown out the sound of the infant's cries, lest Cronus hear them. Instead of the baby, Rhea presented Cronus with a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. Cronus, deceived by his fear and perhaps by the dim light of the primordial age, swallowed the stone, believing it to be his newborn son. This act of deception set the stage for the next great cosmic struggle, the Titanomachy, a war that would redefine the very fabric of the universe. The stone, sometimes referred to as the Omphalos stone, would later be placed at Delphi, marking it as the center of the world. The story is Cronus's reign, though relatively brief in the grand sweep of mythological time, is crucial. It illustrates a recurring theme in Greek mythology, the cyclical nature of power, fear, and rebellion, where each generation struggles to overcome the perceived injustices of the previous one. While the exact details of these primordial births and successions vary slightly across different ancient texts and oral traditions, the core narrative of chaos, Gaia, Uranus, and the rise and fall of Cronus remains a foundational pillar of Greek cosmology. Historians still debate the precise origins of these myths, whether they were indigenous Greek creations, influenced by Near Eastern traditions, or a blend of both. For instance, parallels can be drawn between the castration of Uranus and the Hurrian myth of Kumarbi, who castrates his father Anu, suggesting a possible cultural exchange in the Bronze Age. However, the unique narrative elements and the subsequent development of the Olympian pantheon are distinctly Greek. This early age, before the familiar gods of Olympus took their thrones, was a time of raw, elemental power, where the very forces of nature were personified as divine beings, shaping a world still in its infancy. The Titans, though event, usually overthrown, left an indelible mark, their immense power and often tragic fate serving as a prelude to the more nuanced and complex dramas of the Olympian age. If you're enjoying this, liking and subscribing truly helps and is much appreciated. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Rhea, her heart a fragile bird trapped in her ribs, gazed at the newborn cradled in her arms. This one, her sixth, was different. A spark of defiance, a glint of destiny, seemed to shimmer around him even in the dim light. Kronos, her formidable husband, had swallowed their previous 5 children whole, fearing the prophecy that one of his own would usurp his throne, just as he had usurped his father, Uranos. But Rhea, driven by a love fiercer than any fear, had a plan. She wrapped a stone tightly in swaddling clothes, its cold, unyielding weight a stark contrast to the soft, warm bundle she secretly entrusted to loyal nymphs. This precious infant, Zeus, was spirited away to the remote island of Crete, to the secluded depths of the Dictaean cave, a sanctuary hidden from Kronos' all-consuming gaze. There, nurtured by the gentle nymphs and fed on the milk of the divine goat Amalthea, Zeus grew not just in stature, but in cunning and strength. The cave echoed with his playful shouts, the rustle of leaves as he explored, and the soft bleating of his foster mother. While Kronos, oblivious, swallowed the stone, believing he had once again thwarted fate, Zeus was learning, observing, and preparing. He absorbed the stories of his imprisoned siblings, the fate of his monstrous uncles, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, locked away in Tartarus by Kronos himself. A quiet rage began to simmer within him, a resolve to right the wrongs that had plagued his family for generations. As Zeus matured into a powerful young god, his mind, sharp as a honed blade, began to formulate a strategy. He knew he could not face Kronos alone. His first objective was to free his swallowed siblings. Legends speak of his ingenious method, often attributing it to the aid of Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, or perhaps even Gaia herself, whispering ancient secrets into his ear. Some accounts suggest he approached Kronos disguised, offering him a potent emetic, a drink that would force the Titan king to disgorge his contents. Others hint at a more direct confrontation, a struggle of wills that culminated in Kronos' violent expulsion of his children. Regardless of the exact method, the result was monumental. Out tumbled Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, not as infants, but fully grown, having matured within the confines of their father's immense stomach. They emerged disoriented but alive, their gratitude towards their younger brother immediate and profound. With his siblings at his side, Zeus began to gather his forces. He understood that raw power alone was not enough. Alliances were crucial. His first and arguably most important act was to journey to the bleak, sunless realm of Tartarus. There, he freed the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of immense strength, and the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed, 50-headed giants whom Kronos had imprisoned. These beings, once feared and reviled, now pledged their loyalty to Zeus. The Cyclopes, in a display of their gratitude and skill, forged powerful weapons for the massant Olympian gods. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, a weapon of unparalleled destructive force that would become his signature. For Poseidon, the mighty trident, capable of stirring the seas and shaking the earth. And for Hades, the helm of darkness, which rendered its wearer invisible, a tool of stealth and surprise. The Hecatoncheires, with their multitude of limbs, would prove invaluable in battle, capable of hurling massive rocks with terrifying speed and precision. The stage was set for a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the cosmos. The Titanomachy, the war between the Olympians and the Titans. The Titans, led by Kronos, were the old order, immense and powerful, embodying the primal forces of the universe. They were the children of Uranos and Gaia, ancient and formidable. The Olympians, younger, more agile, and armed with divine weapons, represented a new order, a shift from raw, unbridled power to a more structured, albeit still volatile, form of divine rule. The war was not merely a struggle for dominance, but a clash of cosmic ideologies. The conflict raged for 10 long years, a brutal, protracted struggle that tore at the fabric of existence. The battleground stretched across the entire world, from the highest peaks to the deepest chasms. The sky itself seemed to weep fire and rain as Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, each strike illuminating the world with blinding light and deafening roars. Poseidon's trident churned the oceans into furious maelstroms, causing earthquakes that split the land. Hades, cloaked in his helm, moved unseen, sowing confusion and striking at the Titans' flanks. The Titans, with their immense strength, fought fiercely. Atlas, burdened by the weight of the heavens, led their charge, while Kronos, still powerful despite his age, unleashed his scythe with devastating blows. The very mountains groaned under the strain of their conflict, and the rivers boiled with the heat of divine fury. The earth trembled constantly, a testament to the immense forces unleashed. The air crackled with energy, the clash of divine weapons echoing across the primordial landscape. One of the most pivotal moments in the war, often overlooked in the grand narrative, involved the wise Titaness Themis. Though a Titan herself, she foresaw the ultimate victory of the Olympians, and, along with her daughter, Dike, Justice, chose to side with Zeus, offering counsel and strategic insight. Her defection, though not involving direct combat, was a significant blow to the Titans' morale and provided the Olympians with valuable intelligence. Similarly, Prometheus, another Titan, and his brother Epimetheus also sided with Zeus. Though their motivations and roles in the war are sometimes debated, some accounts suggest Prometheus's foresight led him to believe in the Olympians' eventual triumph, while others hint at a desire for a more just and ordered cosmos. The tide of the war slowly began to turn in the Olympians' favor, largely due to the strategic brilliance of Zeus and the overwhelming power of the Cyclopes' weapons and the Hecatoncheires' relentless assault. The Hecatoncheires, with their 100 hands, could hurl entire mountains at the Titans, burying them under avalanches of rock and earth. Their sheer numbers and tireless energy proved overwhelming. The Cyclopes, meanwhile, continued to forge new thunderbolts for Zeus, ensuring a continuous barrage of divine lightning. Finally, after a decade of relentless warfare, the Olympians launched their decisive assault. Zeus, channeling the full might of his thunderbolts, struck Kronos with a force that reverberated through the cosmos. The earth groaned and the sky split. The sheer power of the blow crippled the mighty Titan king. The other Titans, demoralized by Kronos' defeat and overwhelmed by the combined might of the Olympians, the Cyclopes, and the Hecatoncheires, began to fall. The aftermath was as cataclysmic as the war itself. The defeated Titans, with the exception of a few who had sided with the Olympians or remained neutral, were cast into Tartarus, the deepest, darkest abyss beneath the earth. There they were imprisoned, their immense power contained by unbreakable chains forged by Hephaestus, the god of smithing, and guarded by the tireless hecatoncheires. Kronos himself was among them, his reign definitively ended, his power broken. However, the question of Kronos's ultimate fate remains a point of scholarly dispute. While the prevailing narrative, popularized by Hesiod's Theogony, describes his imprisonment in Tartarus, some later traditions and philosophical interpretations suggest a different end. A few ancient texts hint at Kronos eventually being released, perhaps even ruling over the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise for heroes. This alternative view suggests a cyclical nature to power, or perhaps a form of divine rehabilitation, rather than eternal damnation. Yet the dominant narrative firmly places him in the abyss, a stark warning against unchecked power and the fear of prophecy. With the Titans vanquished, the Olympians stood victorious. The universe, though scarred by the decade-long war, was now theirs to govern. The old order had been overthrown, and a new pantheon of gods, led by Zeus, would establish their dominion from the majestic heights of Mount Olympus. The air, once thick with the dust of battle and the cries of warring deities, now settled into a fragile peace, pregnant with the promise of a new era. The world, battered but not broken, awaited the shaping hands of its new rulers, their destinies intertwined with the very fabric of existence they now oversaw. The echoes of the Titanomachy would forever reverberate through the myths, a testament to the colossal struggle that birthed the age of the Olympian gods. The cosmos, now settled into its new, albeit still volatile order, began to breathe. With Kronos and the elder Titans vanquished, a new generation of deities, led by the formidable Zeus, ascended to Olympus. This wasn't merely a change of guard. It was a fundamental shift in the very fabric of divine governance. The raw, untamed power of the primordial forces and the cyclical, devouring nature of the Titans gave way to a more structured, albeit often tempestuous pantheon. Zeus, having freed his siblings from their father's belly, now divided the realms among them. To him, the boundless sky and the dominion over all gods. To Poseidon, the churning, mysterious depths of the sea. And to Hades, the silent, shadowed kingdom of the underworld. The earth, vibrant and teeming with nascent life, remained a shared domain, a fertile ground for both divine interaction and the burgeoning of new creations. Yet, even with the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, their immense power still resonated through the world, sometimes manifesting as monstrous offspring or lingering primordial energies. The Gigantomachy, the war against the monstrous gigantes, born from the blood of Ouranos, was a testament to this lingering chaos. These colossal beings, with their serpentine legs and immense strength, rose up against the Olympians, seeking to reclaim the dominion that had been wrested from their ancestors. It was a brutal conflict, even more so than the Titanomachy, as the gigantes were prophesied to be invincible to the gods without the aid of a mortal. Here, the threads of divine and mortal destiny began to intertwine. Heracles, the mighty hero, a son of Zeus himself, would later play a crucial role in the final defeat of these earth-born giants, marking an early, pivotal moment where mortal strength and divine power converged to preserve the Olympian order. This war, a sprawling, cataclysmic event, solidified the Olympians' rule, proving their supremacy not just over the old order, but over the very elemental forces of the earth itself. With the divine hierarchy firmly established, the stage was set for the emergence of humanity. Hesiod, in his Works and Days, speaks of 5 ages of man, each progressively worse than the last, a poignant reflection on the perceived decline from a golden, idyllic past. The first was the Age of Gold, a time when mortals lived like gods themselves, free from toil, sorrow, or old age. They dwelled in peace and abundance, the earth spontaneously yielding its fruits, and death was but a gentle slumber. These golden folk, created by Kronos, were pure of heart and spirit. After their passing, their spirits were said to become benevolent guardians, watching over mortals from above. This was a world of effortless harmony, where the line between divine and mortal was blurred, and existence was a perpetual spring. Then came the Age of Silver, a creation of the Olympian gods. These mortals were far inferior to their predecessors, living as helpless children for 100 years, then briefly as adults, burdened by strife and foolishness. They were impious, refusing to honor the gods, and in their folly brought about their own demise. Zeus, angered by their irreverence, buried them beneath the earth, where they became blessed spirits of the underworld. Though of a lesser stature than the Golden Generation, this marked a significant shift. Humanity was no longer effortlessly virtuous, and their relationship with the gods became one of obligation and potential punishment. Following this was the Age of Bronze, a stark and brutal era. These mortals were forged from ash trees, mighty and terrible, delighting in warfare and violence. Their tools, their homes, even their very hearts were made of bronze. They consumed no bread, relying on the strength of their own hands and the spoils of war. They were a self-destructive race, eventually perishing by their own hands, descending into the gloomy house of Hades, leaving no named spirit, Theopolis, behind. This age represents a further descent into human depravity, a time when might made right, and the gentle harmony of earlier ages was a distant memory. Next came the Age of Heroes, a brief yet glorious interlude, and a curious anomaly in Hesiod's otherwise linear decline. This was the age of demigods and noble warriors, a time of epic deeds and legendary battles. The very heroes who fought at Thebes and Troy, though still mortal and subject to death, they were more just and righteous than the bronze folk. After their lives, many were granted a blessed afterlife in the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise at the ends of the earth, ruled by Kronos, who had been freed from Tartarus by Zeus, perhaps as a sign of reconciliation or as a ruler for this new, more virtuous race. This age stands as a testament to humanity's potential for greatness, even amidst a general decline, a glimpse of what could be when mortals strove for honor and glory. Finally, Hesiod lamented his own time, the Age of Iron. This was an age of ceaseless toil, sorrow, and strife. Justice and reverence had fled the earth, replaced by envy, malice, and dishonesty. Children dishonored their parents, friends betrayed friends, and the bonds of kinship dissolved. Might was right, and shame and Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, abandoned humanity, leaving mortals to their bitter fates. This grim portrayal reflects a profound sense of disillusionment, a belief that humanity had fallen irrevocably from its divine origins, forever cursed to a life of hardship and moral decay. Yet, beyond Hesiod's poetic ages, the story of humanity's creation itself is shrouded in various myths, each offering a slightly different perspective on the gods' involvement. One prominent account attributes the creation of mortals to Prometheus, the cunning Titan. After the Titanomachy, when the world was still raw and unformed, Prometheus, whose name means forethought, took clay and water, molding human beings in the image of the gods. He breathed life into them, and then, out of compassion, sought to elevate their existence. He taught them crafts, agriculture, and the knowledge of the stars, lifting them from a primitive, animalistic state. This act of creation, however, was not without its challenges. The most famous tale involving Prometheus and humanity revolves around the sacred fire. Zeus, either out of a desire to keep mortals subservient or to maintain the divine prerogative, withheld fire from humanity. Prometheus, seeing their struggle in the cold and dark, defied Zeus. He stole a spark from the forge of Hephaestus, or perhaps from the sun itself, concealing it within a hollow fennel stalk, and gifted it to humanity. This single act transformed mortal existence. Fire provided warmth, light, the ability to cook food, and to forge tools, laying the foundation for civilization. It was the spark of progress, but also the spark of divine wrath. Zeus, enraged by Prometheus's defiance and his clear favoritism towards mortals, devised a terrible punishment. Prometheus was chained to a mountain in the Caucasus, where an eagle, a symbol of Zeus himself, would daily devour his liver, which would then regenerate overnight, ensuring an eternal torment. This brutal punishment served as a stark warning against challenging Olympian authority. But Zeus's retribution didn't stop there. He also sought to punish humanity for accepting Prometheus's gift. Thus, Pandora was created. Hephaestus, at Zeus's command, fashioned her from earth and water, giving her beauty and grace. Aphrodite bestowed charm, Hermes cunning and deceit, and Athena taught her weaving and crafts. She was a beautiful, irresistible creation, but one imbued with a fatal flaw, insatiable curiosity. She was sent to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose name means afterthought, despite Prometheus's warning never to accept gifts from Zeus. Epimetheus, captivated by her beauty, welcomed her. With Pandora came a jar, or perhaps a box, which Zeus had strictly forbidden her to open. The allure of the forbidden container proved too strong. One day, driven by an irresistible urge, Pandora lifted the lid. Out poured all the evils that plague humanity: toil, sickness, old age, sorrow, vice, and all manner of suffering. Terrified, Pandora quickly slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. Only one thing remained at the bottom of the jar: hope. This myth serves as a powerful explanation for the presence of suffering in the world, attributing it not to divine malice, but to human curiosity and disobedience, yet leaving a glimmer of optimism in the form of enduring hope. The early interactions between gods and mortals were a complex tapestry of awe, fear, love, and often tragedy. The gods were not distant, abstract entities. They walked the earth, intervened in human affairs, and often sought companionship or pleasure among mortals. Zeus, in particular, was notorious for his numerous liaisons with mortal women, often transforming himself into various forms: a swan, a bull, a shower of gold, to achieve his desires. From these unions sprang many of the great heroes and founders of ancient lineages, figures like Heracles, Perseus, and Helen of Troy. These demigods often inherited extraordinary strength, beauty, or skill, but also a life fraught with challenges, as they navigated their dual heritage and often faced the jealousy of Hera, Zeus's queen. Hera, the queen of the gods, was a formidable and often vengeful deity, particularly when it came to Zeus's infidelities. Her wrath frequently fell upon his mortal lovers and their offspring, leading to many tragic tales. The story of Heracles, for instance, is largely defined by Hera's relentless persecution, which forced him to perform his famous 12 labors. This divine intervention, while often destructive, also shaped the course of human history, leading to the rise of heroes who cleared the land of monsters and established new cities and customs. Beyond these personal interactions, the gods also communicated with mortals through oracles, dreams, and omens. The Oracle of Delphi, presided over by Apollo, became a central point of consultation for both individuals and city-states, its pronouncements guiding political decisions, military campaigns, and personal fates. These interactions underscored the belief that the gods were actively involved in the world, their will often inscrutable but always powerful. Historians still debate the extent to which the pronouncements of the Pythia, the priestess at Delphi, were genuinely believed to be divine or were cleverly manipulated by political factions. Regardless, the influence of these divine pronouncements on the course of ancient Greek history is undeniable, shaping the very fabric of their societies. The early mortal world, therefore, was not merely a passive stage for divine drama, but an active participant in its unfolding. Humanity, though flawed and often suffering, possessed a unique spark, a capacity for innovation, heroism, and even defiance that set them apart. The gods, in turn, were not monolithic in their approach to mortals. Some, like Athena, championed wisdom and justice among humans. Others, like Ares, reveled in their conflicts. And still others, like Dionysus, introduced them to the joys of wine and ecstasy. The very landscape of Greece itself seemed to bear the imprint of these early interactions. Mountains were said to be the former bodies of giants, rivers flowed from the tears of grieving nymphs, and sacred groves whispered tales of divine encounters. The physical world was alive with the presence of the gods, and mortals lived in constant awareness of their power, seeking to appease them through sacrifice, prayer, and reverence. The establishment of temples and sacred sites across the land marked humanity's attempt to bridge the gap between their mortal realm and the divine, to create spaces where the two worlds could meet and here prayers could ascend to Olympus. This age, then, was one of profound transformation. The cosmos had settled, the gods had found their dominion, and humanity, in all its varied forms, had emerged. It was a time of nascent civilization, of the first cities rising from the earth, and of the first laws being etched into stone, often inspired by divine decree. The relationship between gods and mortals was still being defined, a delicate balance of power, respect, and occasional explosive conflict. The world was young, vibrant, and filled with the echoes of divine laughter and thunderous pronouncements, laying the groundwork for the epic tales and profound philosophies that would define the ages to come. Perhaps these early humans, looking up at the starry sky, felt a profound connection to the divine, sensing the invisible threads that bound their fleeting lives to the eternal drama of Olympus. They were but a whisper in the vastness of time, yet their story was now inextricably woven into the grand tapestry of the gods. From the shimmering chaos of creation and the grand, often tumultuous reign of the Olympians, our gaze now turns to the mortal realm, where the threads of divine power and human will began to intertwine, weaving the very fabric of heroism. These were not tales of gods alone, but of mortals touched by the divine, whose deeds echoed through the ages, shaping the very understanding of strength, courage, and destiny. And among the first, a figure whose birth was foretold by an oracle, a child destined to slay a monster and found a lineage of kings, was Perseus. His story began in Argos, the city nestled in the Peloponnese, where King Acrisius, a man haunted by prophecy, received a chilling pronouncement from the Oracle of Delphi. his own grandson would be the cause of his death. Terrified, Acrisius imprisoned his only daughter, Danae, in a bronze tower, hoping to defy fate. But the gods, as ever, had their own designs. Zeus, king of the gods, captivated by Danae's beauty, descended to her chamber not in thunder or lightning, but as a shower of golden rain, a gentle, shimmering cascade that bypassed all locks and guards. From this divine union, Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius discovered the infant, his fear turned to a cold dread. He dared not slay his grandson directly, for that would invite the wrath of the Furies. Instead, he placed Danae and the babe in a wooden chest and cast it into the sea, hoping the waves would claim them. Perhaps he imagined the chest tumbling endlessly beneath the dark waters, the prophecy drowned and forgotten. But the fates, those immutable weavers of destiny, had other plans. The chest drifted safely to the island of Seriphos, where it was discovered by a kind fisherman named Dictys, who rescued them and raised Perseus as his own. Years passed, and Perseus grew into a strong, courageous young man, unaware of his royal lineage or the prophecy that shadowed his life. Seriphos was ruled by Dictys' brother, King Polydectes, a man whose heart was far less benevolent. Polydectes desired Danae, but Perseus, fiercely protective of his mother, stood in his way. To rid himself of the troublesome youth, Polydectes concocted a cruel scheme. He announced a grand feast, inviting all his nobles to bring a gift of horses. Knowing Perseus, a poor fisherman's son, had none. When Perseus arrived empty-handed, Polydectes publicly shamed him, goading him into boasting that he could bring any gift, even the head of the Gorgon Medusa. The Gorgons were monstrous sisters, children of the ancient sea deities Phorcys and Ceto, whose appearance was so terrifying that a single glance could turn a living being to stone. Medusa, unlike her immortal sisters, was mortal, but no less deadly. Her hair was a writhing mass of venomous snakes, her eyes glowed with a petrifying light, and tusks protruded from her mouth. The quest was suicidal, designed to ensure Perseus's demise. Yet the gods, who had orchestrated his birth, would not abandon him. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, and Hermes, messenger of the gods, appeared to Perseus, offering aid. Athena lent him her polished bronze shield, which would serve as a mirror, allowing him to see Medusa's reflection without looking directly at her. Hermes gifted him winged sandals, allowing him to fly, and a magical, curved sword capable of piercing the Gorgon's scales. But even with these divine gifts, the path to Medusa was fraught with peril. Perseus first had to find the Greys, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth. He snatched their eye, forcing them to reveal the location of the nymphs, who possessed 3 vital artifacts: the Cap of Darkness, which rendered the wearer invisible, a magical pouch to hold Medusa's head, and the winged sandals. Armed with these, Perseus flew to the desolate land where the Gorgons slumbered. He found them asleep, their serpentine hair hissing softly in the stillness. Guided by Athena's reflection in his shield, he But Perseus placed the day slightly on the rock and flew away, escaping the wrath of Medusa's awakening sisters. On his journey home, Perseus encountered another desperate plight. In the kingdom of Ethiopia, Princess Andromeda was chained to a rock, a sacrifice to a sea monster, Cetus, sent by Poseidon to punish her mother Cassiopeia for her boastful claim of beauty surpassing the Nereids. Perseus, captivated by Andromeda's plight and beauty, slew the monster, freeing her and claiming her as his bride, despite her uncle Phineus's prior claim. He used Medusa's head to turn Phineus and his followers to stone during their wedding feast. Returning to Seriphos, Perseus found his mother still besieged by Polydectes. He entered the palace, announced his return, and when Polydectes scoffed at his claims of slaying Medusa, Perseus produced the head. With a flash of petrifying light, Polydectes and his courtiers were turned to stone, frozen in their moment of disbelief. Perseus then made Dictys king of Seriphos and, after fulfilling his obligations, returned the magical artifacts to the gods. The prophecy of Acrisius's death still hung in the air. Perseus, accompanied by Andromeda, traveled to Larissa, where athletic games were being held. Acrisius, hearing of his grandson's fame, had also traveled there, perhaps hoping to see him from afar, or perhaps simply by cruel coincidence. During the discus throw, Perseus's discus, caught by a gust of wind, swerved wildly, striking an old man in the crowd. That man was King Acrisius, and so the prophecy was fulfilled, not through malice, but through an unforeseen accident. This tragic, accidental fulfillment of prophecy highlights a recurring theme in Greek mythology: the inescapable nature of fate, even when mortals strive to defy it. Perseus, burdened by this unintentional patricide, did not return to Argos. Instead, he exchanged kingdoms with his cousin Megapenthes, becoming king of Tiryns and founding the city of Mycenae, its mighty walls later said to have been built by Cyclopes, a testament to its legendary strength. The lineage of Perseus would be long and storied, leading eventually to another hero, perhaps the greatest of all Greek heroes, a figure whose strength was matched only by his suffering: Heracles. Born of Zeus's union with Alcmene, a mortal queen, Heracles' very existence was a challenge to Hera, Zeus's jealous wife. Hera, ever vengeful, sought to destroy him from birth. She delayed his birth by manipulating the fates, allowing his cousin Eurystheus to be born first, thus ensuring Eurystheus would hold dominion over Heracles. She also sent 2 venomous snakes to his cradle when he was but an infant. Yet even as a babe, Heracles displayed his extraordinary strength, strangling the serpents with his bare hands, a clear sign of his divine parentage and immense power. As he grew, Heracles' strength became legendary, but so too did his impulsiveness and fiery temper. He was trained in various arts, but his raw power often overshadowed his wisdom. In a fit of madness, induced by Hera, Heracles tragically slew his own wife, Megara, and their children. Overwhelmed by grief and remorse, he sought purification and guidance from the Oracle of Delphi. The Oracle, influenced by Hera, commanded him to serve his cousin, King Eurystheus of Tiryns, for 12 years, performing whatever labors Eurystheus demanded. These were to be the 12 labors of Heracles, a series of impossible tasks designed to break him, but which ultimately cemented his legendary status. The first labor was to slay the Nemean lion, a beast with impenetrable hide that terrorized the region of Nemea. Heracles tracked the lion to its lair and, finding his arrows useless against its skin, wrestled it with his bare hands, finally strangling it to death. He then used the lion's own claws to skin it, and thereafter wore its hide as armor, rendering him invulnerable to most attacks. This image of Heracles clad in the lion's pelt became iconic. His second labor was to kill the Lernaean Hydra, a monstrous serpent with multiple heads, one of which was immortal. For every head Heracles cut off, 2 more grew in its place. He was aided by his nephew, Iolaus, who cauterized each neck stump with a burning brand after Heracles severed a head, preventing regrowth. Finally, Heracles used a golden sword to cut off the immortal head and buried it under a massive rock. He then dipped his arrows in the Hydra's venom, making them instantly fatal. Next, Heracles was tasked with capturing the Ceryneian hind, a magnificent, swift deer with golden antlers and bronze hooves, sacred to Artemis. He pursued it for a full year across Greece, finally cornering it and capturing it without harming it, as he had promised Artemis. This labor tested his patience and perseverance rather than brute strength. The fourth labor involved capturing the Erymanthian boar, a giant, fearsome beast that ravaged the countryside. Heracles chased the boar through deep snow until it collapsed from exhaustion, then captured it alive and carried it back to Eurystheus, who famously cowered in a large jar at the sight of the live monster. The fifth labor was perhaps the most humiliating: to clean the Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas of Elis owned vast herds of cattle, and his stables had not been cleaned in 30 years, accumulating an immense amount of dung. Heracles, rather than shoveling, cleverly diverted the rivers Alpheus and Peneus through the stables, washing them clean in a single day. However, Augeas refused to pay him the promised reward, leading to future conflict. For his sixth labor, Heracles had to drive away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers that could be shot like arrows. He used a rattle given to him by Athena to frighten the birds into the air, then shot them down with his poisoned arrows. The seventh labor took him to Crete to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent white bull that Poseidon had sent to King Minos. Heracles wrestled the bull into submission and brought it back to Eurystheus, who released it. This bull would later become the Marathonian bull. For the eighth labor, Heracles had to bring back the mares of Diomedes, 4 flesh-eating horses belonging to King Diomedes of Thrace. Heracles subdued the horses by feeding them their own master, then brought them back to Eurystheus, who released them on Mount Olympus, where they were eventually eaten by wild animals. The ninth labor was to obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a tribe of fierce warrior women. Hippolyta, impressed by Heracles, was willing to give him her girdle, a gift from Ares. However, Hera, disguised as an Amazon, spread rumors that Heracles intended to abduct Hippolyta, leading to a fierce battle. Heracles, believing Hippolyta had betrayed him, killed her and took the girdle. The 10th labor sent Heracles to the far west, to the island of Erythea, to capture the cattle of Geryon, a monstrous, 3-bodied giant. Heracles sailed there in the golden cup of Helios, killed Geryon and his herdsman Eurytion, and then faced a long and arduous journey back to Greece, battling various foes and challenges along the way, including the monster Cacus in Italy. The 11th labor was to fetch the golden apples of the Hesperides. These apples grew in a sacred garden guarded by the Hesperides, nymphs of the evening, and a 100-headed dragon named Ladon. Heracles first had to find Nereus, the old man of the sea, to learn the garden's location. He then encountered Prometheus, still chained to his rock, and freed him, killing the eagle that gnawed at his liver. Finally, he came to Atlas, who held the heavens. On his shoulders, Heracles offered to hold the sky for Atlas if Atlas would fetch the apples. Atlas agreed, but once he had the apples, he tried to trick Heracles into holding the sky permanently. Heracles, using his wits, tricked Atlas into taking the sky back for just a moment while he adjusted his padding, then quickly retrieved the apples and departed. The 12th and final labor, the most dangerous of all, was to bring Cerberus, the 3-headed dog guardian of the underworld, to Eurystheus. Heracles descended into Hades, guided by Hermes and Athena. He encountered many shades, including those of Meleager and Medusa. He wrestled Cerberus into submission with his bare hands, protected by the Nemean lion's hide, and dragged the terrified beast back to the upper world. Eurystheus, upon seeing Cerberus, was so terrified that he immediately released Heracles from his service. These 12 labors were not merely feats of strength, they were a journey of atonement, purification, and self-discovery. Through them, Heracles faced not only external monsters, but also his own inner demons, his impulsiveness, and the tragic consequences of his madness. He emerged not just as a strong man, but as a hero whose deeds represented the triumph of human endurance and divine favor over overwhelming odds. His story, unlike Perseus's, is less about fate's inescapable hand and more about the consequences of divine wrath and the arduous path to redemption. While Perseus's tale often highlights the role of prophecy and the accidental fulfillment of destiny, Heracles' narrative emphasizes the brutal, often unfair demands placed upon mortals by the gods, and the sheer, indomitable will required to overcome them. Historians still debate the precise origins of many of these heroic myths. Were they based on actual historical figures whose deeds were exaggerated over time? Or were they entirely mythical constructs designed to explain natural phenomena, societal values, or the struggles of early human communities? For instance, the Nemean lion and Lernaean hydra could be seen as metaphors for the dangers of the wild and the challenges of taming the land. The cleaning of the Augean stables might reflect early engineering feats or the need for public works. The very notion of a hero performing labors for atonement could reflect ancient legal or religious practices. The enduring popularity of these tales, passed down through generations, suggests they resonated deeply with the Greek psyche, embodying ideals of courage, perseverance, and the struggle against chaos. The architectural remains of Mycenae, the city founded by Perseus, with its massive cyclopean walls, still stand today, inspiring awe and wonder. These imposing structures, built from huge, unworked stones, were so grand that later Greeks believed only giants like the Cyclopes could have constructed them. This tangible link to the mythical past lends a certain weight to the stories, blurring the lines between legend and history. Similarly, the region around Tiryns, where Heracles performed his service to Eurystheus, is rich with archaeological sites that evoke the Bronze Age world in which these heroes were said to have lived. The tales of Perseus and Heracles laid the groundwork for countless other heroic narratives that would follow. They established archetypes: the monster slayer, the questing hero, the strong man, the one who suffers and atones. Their stories are filled with moments of divine intervention, both benevolent and malevolent, underscoring the pervasive belief that the gods were intimately involved in human affairs. They also showcase the profound difference between the gods, who acted on whims and desires, and the heroes who, despite their divine connections, were bound by mortal limitations, suffering, and the relentless march of destiny. These heroes, with their triumphs and their flaws, their moments of glory and their profound sorrows, became the very embodiment of human potential and the enduring spirit of courage in the face of the impossible. The Aegean breeze, carrying whispers of adventure and the scent of salt, beckoned heroes from every corner of the Hellenic world. It was a time when the gods still walked among mortals, their whims shaping destinies, and the very fabric of reality seemed thinner, allowing for wonders and terrors alike. Our gaze now turns to a tale woven into the very heart of Greek myth: the voyage of the Argo, a ship destined to sail into legend, carrying heroes on a quest for the Golden Fleece. The story begins in Iolcus, a city nestled by the sea in Thessaly. Its rightful king, Ascent, had been overthrown by his ambitious half-brother Perilous. A prophecy had warned Perilous to beware a man wearing only one sandal. Years later, a young man named Jason arrived in Iolcus, having lost a sandal while helping an old woman across a river. An old woman who was, in fact, the goddess Hera in disguise, testing mortal piety. Jason, rightful heir to Iolcus, confronted Perilous, demanding his throne. Perilous, cunning and fearful of the prophecy, agreed, but only if Jason could retrieve the golden fleece from the distant, dangerous land of Colchis. This was no ordinary fleece. It belonged to the winged ram Chrysomelis, which had carried Phrixus to safety from his wicked stepmother Ino. Hanging in a sacred grove, guarded by a sleepless dragon, it seemed an impossible task. A ploy by Perilous to rid himself of his rival. But Jason was not alone. The call for heroes went out across Greece, and from every polis, champions responded, eager for glory and adventure. The ship itself was a marvel, built by the master craftsman Argus with the aid of the goddess Athena. Named the Argo for its builder, it was said to possess a magical piece of timber from the talking oak of Dodona, embedded in its prow, which could offer prophecies and guidance. Among the illustrious crew, the Argonauts, were some of the most legendary figures of the age. Heracles, the mighty son of Zeus, renowned for his 12 labors. Orpheus, the divine musician whose lyre could charm beasts and stones. Castor and Pollux, the twin sons of Leda, one a master horseman, the other an unbeatable boxer. Peleus, father of the future hero Achilles, and even Atalanta, the swift huntress. Though some versions of the myth suggest she was not among the original crew, or perhaps joined later, a testament to the fluid nature of these oral traditions. Their journey was fraught with peril and wonder. Their first major stop was the island of Lemnos, inhabited solely by women who had murdered their husbands, cursed by Aphrodite for neglecting her worship. The Argonauts, welcomed by the queen Hypsipyle, stayed for a time, siring a new generation of Lemnian men. This interlude, though pleasant, was a reminder of the human element amidst the epic quest, and a source of later historical debate among scholars as to its exact place in the narrative. Was it a necessary stop, or a later addition to explain the island's unique social structure? Leaving Lemnos, they sailed to the land of the Doliones, where they were initially welcomed by King Cyzicus. However, a misunderstanding led to a tragic battle in the darkness, and Cyzicus was accidentally killed by Jason. This accidental fratricide, a recurring motif in Greek tragedy, cast a somber shadow over the crew, reminding them of the unpredictable nature of fate. Their journey continued, leading them to the land of the Bebrices, ruled by the boastful king Amycus, who challenged all strangers to a boxing match. Pollux, the skilled boxer, defeated him, displaying the raw strength and prowess of the Argonauts. They navigated the treacherous Symplegades, the clashing rocks, which guarded the entrance to the Black Sea, crushing any ship that dared pass. Guided by the prophet Phineus, whom they had freed from the torment of the Harpies, they sent a dove through first. When it passed safely, the rocks paused, allowing the Argo to swiftly row through, forever fixing their position. No longer a threat. This feat, a testament to divine aid and human courage, marked a crucial turning point in their voyage. Finally, after months of sailing, they reached Colchis, a land shrouded in mist and ruled by the powerful King Aeetes, son of the sun god Helios. Aeetes, unwilling to part with the fleece, set Jason seemingly impossible tasks: yoke fire-breathing bulls and plow a field, then sow dragon's teeth from which armed warriors would spring, and finally defeat the sleepless dragon guarding the fleece. It was here that the true magic of the quest unfolded, not through strength alone, but through love and cunning. Aeetes' daughter, Medea, a powerful sorceress and priestess of Hecate, fell deeply in love with Jason thanks to the intervention of Hera and Aphrodite. Against her father's wishes, Medea aided Jason, providing him with an ointment to protect him from the bull's flames, and advising him to throw a stone among the sown warriors, causing them to fight and kill each other. Finally, she used her potent magic to lull the dragon to sleep, allowing Jason to seize the glittering golden fleece. With the fleece in hand, Jason and Medea, along with the Argonauts, fled Colchis, pursued by Aeetes' fleet. Medea, in a desperate act to delay her father, committed a horrific deed. She murdered her own brother, Apsyrtus, dismembered his body, and scattered his limbs into the sea, forcing Aeetes to stop and collect them for burial. This act, a chilling demonstration of Medea's dark power and her devotion to Jason, would forever stain her hands and foreshadow the tragedy that would later consume her. The return journey was as perilous as the outward voyage, with various detours and trials. They sailed through the land of the Sirens, whose enchanting songs lured sailors to their deaths. But Orpheus played his lyre so beautifully that his music drowned out their deadly melody. They passed Scylla and Charybdis, the monstrous whirlpool and six-headed beast, navigating them with the help of Thetis, Achilles' mother, and the Nereids. They even encountered Talos, the giant bronze automaton guarding Crete, whom Medea defeated with her magic. Upon their return to Iolcus, Jason presented the golden fleece to Peleus. However, Peleus reneged on his promise. Medea, enraged by Peleus's treachery and Jason's helplessness, used her cunning once more. She tricked Peleus's daughters into believing she could restore their father's youth by chopping him up and boiling him in a cauldron with magical herbs. They did so only to find their father dead. This act of gruesome revenge forced Jason and Medea to flee Iolcus, their victory tainted by bloodshed and betrayal. They eventually found refuge in Corinth, where their story would take an even darker turn, a tale for another time. The saga of the Argonauts, with its blend of heroic deeds, divine intervention, and human failings, stands as a foundational myth, influencing countless later narratives. It speaks to the allure of the unknown, the pursuit of glory, and the complex interplay between fate and free will. From the sun-drenched seas and distant lands, our narrative now shifts, like a changing wind, to the ancient, walled city of Thebes, a place steeped in prophecy and shadowed by an inescapable curse. Thebes, unlike the seafaring adventures of the Argonauts, is a city bound by earth, by its 7 gates, and by a destiny woven by the gods themselves, particularly Apollo. Here we delve into the tragic, fate-driven sagas of the House of Labdacus, a lineage cursed through generations, where every attempt to escape prophecy only drew its victims deeper into its inescapable embrace. The curse began with Laius, king of Thebes, and his wife Jocasta. An oracle at Delphi foretold that Laius would be killed by his own son, and that this son would then marry his mother. Terrified by this prophecy, when Jocasta bore a son, Laius ordered a servant to expose the infant on Mount Cithaeron, his neckles pierced and bound, hence the name Oedipus, meaning swollen foot. The servant, pitying the child, instead gave him to a Corinthian shepherd, who in turn gave him to King Polybus and Queen Merope of Corinth, who raised him as their own. Oedipus grew to manhood, a prince in Corinth, unaware of his true parentage. One day, at a feast, a drunken guest taunted him, claiming he was not his father's son. Troubled, Oedipus sought the oracle at Delphi himself. The oracle did not answer his question directly, but instead delivered the same chilling prophecy. He was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, and believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, Oedipus vowed never to return to Corinth, hoping to escape his dreadful fate. He set out on the road, a wanderer. At a narrow crossroads, he encountered an old man in a chariot, accompanied by attendants. An argument over right-of-way escalated into violence. The old man struck Oedipus, who, in a fit of rage, killed the old man and his retinue, save for one servant who escaped. Unbeknownst to Oedipus, the old man was Laius, his true father, on his way to consult the oracle. Thus, the first part of the prophecy was fulfilled, not by design, but by the cruel hand of chance. Oedipus continued his journey towards Thebes, a city then gripped by terror. A monstrous sphinx, with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a woman, guarded the city gates, posing a riddle to all who passed. Those who failed to answer were devoured. The riddle was, what walks on 4 feet in the morning, 2 feet at noon, and 3 feet in the evening? Many had tried and failed, and the city was in despair. Oedipus, with his sharp intellect, confronted the Sphinx. He answered correctly, man, crawling as a baby, walking upright as an adult, and using a cane in old age. Defeated, the Sphinx hurled herself from her rocky perch to her death. The grateful Thebans, whose king had recently been killed, Laius, though they did not know by whom, hailed Oedipus as their savior and offered him the throne and the hand of their widowed queen, Jocasta. Oedipus accepted, marrying his own mother, unknowingly fulfilling the second, most abhorrent part of the prophecy. For years, Oedipus ruled Thebes justly and wisely, fathering 4 children with Jocasta, 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices, and 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. The city prospered, and the terrible prophecy seemed forgotten, buried beneath the weight of years and the veil of ignorance. However, the gods do not forget. A terrible plague descended upon Thebes, wasting its people and blighting its crops. The city suffered, and Oedipus, ever the concerned ruler, sent his brother-in-law Creon to consult the oracle at Delphi. Creon returned with a grim message. The plague was divine retribution for the unpunished murder of King Laius. The killer resided within Thebes and must be expelled. Oedipus, resolute in his duty, vowed to find the murderer. He consulted the blind prophet Tiresias, who initially refused to speak, knowing the terrible truth. But Oedipus pressed him, accusing him of complicity. Provoked, Tiresias revealed the horrifying truth. You are the murderer you seek. You are living in sin with the one who bore you. Oedipus, in his arrogance and disbelief, dismissed Tiresias as a madman, accusing him and Creon of conspiring against him. But doubt, once sown, began to grow. Jocasta, trying to comfort him, mentioned that Laius had been killed at a crossroads by a group of men, and that her son had been exposed as an infant. This detail, combined with the earlier encounter, began to unravel Oedipus's world. He sent for the sole surviving witness of the roadside murder, the old shepherd who had given him to the Corinthian. At the same time, a messenger arrived from Corinth, announcing the death of Polybus, whom Oedipus still believed to be his father. The messenger, trying to reassure Oedipus that he no longer needed to fear the prophecy, revealed that Oedipus was not Polybus's true son, but had been given to him as a baby by a shepherd from Thebes. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The Theban shepherd arrived, the same man who had been ordered to expose the infant Oedipus, and the same man who had witnessed Laius's murder. Under Oedipus's desperate questioning, the shepherd confirmed everything. He had given the baby to the Corinthian, And that baby was the son of Laius and Jocasta. The truth, when it finally burst forth, was unbearable. Oedipus, the great solver of riddles, was himself the answer to the greatest, most tragic riddle of all. He had killed his father, married his mother, and fathered children with her. Jocasta, realizing the unspeakable horror, fled into the palace and hanged herself. Oedipus, finding her body, took the golden brooches from her gown, and in a fit of despair and self-punishment, blinded himself, so that he would never again have to look upon the world or his children, whom he had brought into such a cursed existence. Blinded and disgraced, Oedipus was exiled from Thebes, led by his devoted daughter Antigone. His sons, Eteocles and Polynice, rather than supporting their father, squabbled over the throne, agreeing to rule in alternating years. However, Eteocles, after his year, refused to relinquish power. Polynice, enraged, gathered an army from Argos and launched the 7 against Thebes expedition, a devastating war against his own city. The brothers met in single combat before the city walls, fulfilling another grim prophecy. They killed each other, ensuring the curse continued to plague the house of Labdacus. Creon, Jocasta's brother, assumed the throne of Thebes. He declared Eteocles a hero and ordered him buried with full honors, but decreed that Polynice, as a traitor, should be left unburied, his body to rot, a sacrilege against divine law. This decree set the stage for the final, poignant act of the Theban cycle. Antigone, defying Creon's unjust law, chose to honor her brother Polynice with burial rites, believing divine law superseded human decree. She was caught and condemned to death by Creon, who, in his stubborn adherence to his own authority, refused to yield even when Tiresias warned him of the gods' displeasure. Antigone, a figure of uncompromising moral courage, chose death over dishonor. She was sealed alive in a tomb. When Creon, finally swayed by Tiresias's prophecies and the pleas of his son Ammon, who was betrothed to Antigone, went to release her, it was too late. Antigone had hanged herself. Haman, finding her, took his own life, and upon hearing of her son's death, Creon's wife, Eurydice, also committed suicide. Thebes, a city once saved by Oedipus, was now consumed by the very curse that had brought him there, a testament to the inescapable power of fate and the tragic consequences of human hubris. The Theban cycle, unlike the adventurous Argonautica, delves into the darkest corners of human experience: incest, parricide, fratricide, and the relentless pursuit of destiny. It explores the nature of free will versus predestination, a question that has puzzled philosophers and theologians for millennia. Did Oedipus truly have a choice, or was he merely a puppet of the gods, fulfilling a prophecy laid out before his birth? Historians and literary critics still debate the extent to which the characters in these myths are responsible for their actions versus being victims of an unyielding cosmic order. These tales, though ancient, resonate with timeless questions about justice, morality, and the human condition. Whispering through the ages, like the wind through the ruins of a once great city. The air grew thick with destiny, a palpable tension that seemed to hum across the Aegean Sea, long before the first ship set sail for Troy. The seeds of the conflict had been sown much earlier, not on battlefields, but in the halls of the gods, amidst a celebration that should have been joyous. It was at the wedding of Perilous and Thetis, the very parents of the great Achilles, that Eris, the goddess of discord, felt herself slighted, uninvited. She cast a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest," into the midst of the divine revelry. Immediately, a dispute erupted among 3 of the most powerful goddesses: Hera, the queen of the gods; Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Each believed herself the rightful recipient of the apple, and their quarrel became so intense that Zeus, ever the weary arbiter of divine squabbles, refused to choose. Instead, he dispatched them to Mount Ida, a place where a mortal shepherd, known for his discerning eye and fairness, tended his flocks. This shepherd was Paris, a prince of Troy, though he lived in exile, having been abandoned as an infant due to a prophecy that he would one day bring about the destruction of his city. The goddesses appeared before Paris, each offering a bribe to sway his judgment. Hera promised him power and dominion over all of Asia. Athena offered wisdom and unparalleled skill in battle, ensuring he would never lose a war. But Aphrodite, with a whisper that seemed to caress the very air, offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Paris, swayed by the allure of love and beauty, awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite, a decision that sealed the fate of countless mortals and set in motion a chain of events that would echo through history. Aphrodite, true to her word, assisted Paris in his quest to claim Helen. He journeyed to Sparta, ostensibly on a diplomatic mission, and there, amidst the lavish hospitality of Menelaus, he encountered Helen. Her beauty was legendary, a radiance that could launch 1,000 ships, as the poets would later sing. Whether Helen was truly abducted, enchanted by Aphrodite's magic, or willingly eloped with Paris, remains a point of scholarly debate, a mystery shrouded in the mists of time. Ancient texts offer conflicting accounts. Some portray her as a helpless victim, others as a willing participant, captivated by Paris's charm and the promise of a passionate new life. Regardless of the precise circumstances, when Menelaus returned from a journey to Crete to find his wife and a significant portion of his treasury gone, his fury knew no bounds. He immediately invoked an ancient oath, a pact sworn by all the Greek chieftains who had once vied for Helen's hand. Before her marriage to Menelaus, her stepfather, Tyndareus, fearing the inevitable strife her choice would cause, had made all her suitors swear to defend her chosen husband against any wrong committed against him. Now, Menelaus called upon this oath, appealing to his brother, Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae, to rally the Greek forces. Agamemnon, ambitious and eager for glory, readily agreed to lead the expedition. The call to arms spread like wildfire across the myriad city-states of Greece. From the rugged mountains of Thessaly to the sun-drenched shores of Ithaca, heroes and kings began to gather their armies. The greatest warriors of the age answered the summons. The cunning Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who initially feigned madness to avoid the war, but was tricked into revealing his sanity. The mighty Ajax, a towering figure of strength and courage. And of course, Achilles, the swift-footed son of Peleus and Thetis, whose mother, knowing of a prophecy that he would die if he went to Troy, had tried to hide him among women on the island of Cyrus. Odysseus, with his characteristic shrewdness, uncovered Achilles' disguise by offering gifts, including weapons, and observing which items Achilles chose. The assembling of such a vast armada was an unprecedented undertaking. Ships, hundreds of them, began to converge on Aulis, a coastal town in Boeotia, their sails billowing like white clouds against the azure sky. The air thrummed with the anticipation of war, the clanking of armor, the shouts of men, and the rhythmic creak of timbers. It was a sight to behold, a testament to the collective might of the Achaean Greek forces, perhaps the largest military expedition ever assembled in the ancient world up to that point. The sheer logistics of feeding, watering, and housing tens of thousands of men and their horses for an extended period must have been a monumental challenge, one that often went unmentioned in the heroic narratives. However, their departure was plagued by ill omens and divine wrath. The winds refused to blow, leaving the ships becalmed in the harbor of Aulis. The prophet Calchas revealed that the goddess Artemis was angered because Agamemnon had killed a sacred stag in her grove and boasted of his hunting prowess. To appease her and gain favorable winds, Agamemnon was told he must sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. In a heart-wrenching decision, Agamemnon lured Iphigenia to Aulis under the pretense of marrying her to Achilles. At the altar, just as the knife was poised, Artemis, moved by compassion or perhaps by the sheer horror of the act, replaced Iphigenia with a deer, whisking the maiden away to serve as her priestess in Taurus. The winds then rose, filling the sails, and the great fleet finally set forth, a shimmering procession across the wine-dark sea, bound for the distant shores of Troy. The journey itself was not without incident, though the main focus of the epic tales lies in the destination. Upon reaching the Troad, the region surrounding Troy, the Achaeans faced their first challenge, landing on the heavily defended beaches. A prophecy stated that the first Greek to set foot on Trojan soil would be the first to die. Protesilaus, a brave warrior, leapt ashore, fulfilling the prophecy and becoming the first casualty of the war. His sacrifice, though swift, marked the true beginning of the hostilities. The city of Troy itself was a formidable fortress. Perched on a strategic hill overlooking the Hellespont, its massive walls, said to have been built by the gods Poseidon and Apollo, seemed impregnable. For 9 long years, the Achaean forces besieged the city, a period of protracted conflict marked by skirmishes, raids, and individual duels rather than constant, large-scale battles. This long duration is a verifiable historical fact, often cited in ancient texts like Homer's Iliad, which details only a few weeks of the 10th and final year of the war. The Achaeans did not simply sit outside the walls. They conducted raids on neighboring Trojan allies, plundering their cities for supplies and treasure, and establishing a base camp on the beach where their ships were beached. Life in the Achaean camp during these years was a mix of boredom, tension, and sporadic violence. Warriors yearned for glory, but also for home. Supplies dwindled, morale ebbed and flowed, and disputes arose among the leaders. One such dispute, a pivotal moment in the narrative, occurred in the 10th year of the siege. Agamemnon, as the supreme commander, had claimed Chryseis, the daughter of a priest of Apollo, as his war prize. When her father begged for her return, Agamemnon refused, insulting the priest. Apollo, enraged, sent a plague upon the Achaean camp, causing widespread death. The prophet Calchas, under Achilles' protection, revealed the cause of the plague. Agamemnon, pressured by the suffering of his army, reluctantly agreed to return Chryseis, but in a fit of pique, he demanded Perseus, Achilles' own war prize, in compensation. This act of blatant disrespect ignited Achilles' legendary wrath. Feeling dishonored and betrayed, Achilles withdrew himself and his form. Idiable Myrmidon warriors from the fighting, vowing not to return until Agamemnon acknowledged his error and offered suitable reparations. Achilles' withdrawal had an immediate and devastating impact on the Achaean war effort. Without his unparalleled skill and the ferocity of his Myrmidons, the tide of battle began to turn in favor of the Trojans. The Trojans, led by the noble Hector, the valiant Aeneas, and the wise King Priam, were formidable defenders of their homeland. They fought with the desperation of those protecting their families and their city. Hector, in particular, emerged as the Trojans' greatest champion, a warrior of immense courage and integrity, a stark contrast to the often petty squabbles of the Greek heroes. The early years of the war saw a series of back-and-forth struggles. Sometimes the Achaeans would push the Trojans back to the city walls, and other times the Trojans would surge forward, threatening the Achaean ships. The gods themselves were often involved, taking sides and intervening in battles, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. Athena frequently aided the Greeks, while Apollo and Aphrodite favored the Trojans. Zeus, the king of the gods, attempted to remain neutral, though his sympathies often seemed to lean towards Hector, whom he admired. One lesser-known detail from these early years is the fate of Philoctetes, a skilled archer who possessed the bow and arrows of Heracles. On the journey to Troy, he was bitten by a snake on the island of Lemnos. The wound festered, emitting a terrible stench and causing him unbearable pain. The other Achaean leaders, unable to tolerate his cries and the foul odor, abandoned him on the deserted island. For 10 years, he languished there, a forgotten hero, until in the final year of the war, an oracle declared that Troy could not fall without the arrows of Heracles. Odysseus and Diomedes were then dispatched to retrieve him, a mission that highlights the desperate measures the Achaeans were willing to take as the siege dragged on. The war was not just a clash of armies. It was a test of endurance, a crucible that forged legends and broke men. The initial years were a slow, grinding attrition, a war of wills as much as a war of swords. The Trojans, secure within their mighty walls, could withstand assaults, while the Achaeans, far from home, struggled with dwindling resources and internal strife. The conflict was a tapestry woven with threads of heroism and cowardice, honor and deceit, love and profound loss. The whispers of the wind carried the cries of battle, the lamentations for the fallen, and the distant echoes of a golden apple, a fateful choice, and the tragic consequences that followed. The stage was set for the final, brutal acts of the Trojan War, a conflict that would forever shape the myths and memories of the ancient world. The wind, once a gentle whisper carrying the scent of olive groves, now roared across the Aegean, carrying with it the clamor of war. For 9 long years, the siege of Troy had worn on, a relentless grind of bronze against bronze, a testament to human stubbornness and divine decree. The Achaeans, a confederation of Greek heroes and their armies, had landed on the Troad, their ships beached like slumbering leviathans along the shore, their tents stretching for miles, a temporary city built for destruction. Within the formidable walls of Troy, the Trojans, led by King Priam and his valiant sons, Hector and Paris, stood firm, their defiance a beacon against the relentless tide. The early years of the war had been marked by skirmishes, raids on neighboring towns for supplies, and duels that often ended in single combat, a grim ballet of honor and death. Yet the true heart of the conflict beat around the towering figure of Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Achaeans, whose near invincibility was matched only by his fierce pride. When Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae and leader of the Achaean forces, dishonored Achilles by seizing his war prize, the maiden Perseus, Achilles withdrew from battle. His absence cast a long shadow over the Achaean camp, their morale plummeting, their victories turning to defeats. It was during this period that the Trojans, emboldened by Achilles' withdrawal, pushed the Achaeans back to their ships, threatening to set them ablaze. The air was thick with the dust of battle, the cries of the wounded, and the metallic tang of blood. The gods, ever present in the lives of mortals, watched from the heights of Mount Olympus, their loyalties divided. Athena and Hera championed the Achaeans, their divine will pushing for Troy's destruction, fueled by ancient grievances and promises. Apollo and Aphrodite, however, favored the Trojans, their divine interventions often shifting the tide of battle, granting strength to one side, confusion to the other. Sometimes, their forms would shimmer into existence on the battlefield, cloaked in mist or light, guiding an arrow, deflecting a spear, or lifting a favored hero from the fray. It was a constant, unseen war above the human one, a cosmic chess match where mortal lives were the pawns. The turning point in the war came with the death of Patroclus, Achilles' beloved companion. Donning Achilles' armor, Patroclus had ridden into battle, hoping to rally the Achaean forces. He fought with the fury of Achilles himself, driving the Trojans back, but his courage ultimately led to his demise at the hands of Hector, aided by Apollo. The news of Patroclus' death shattered Achilles' heart and ignited a rage so profound it shook the very foundations of the earth. He re-entered the battle, clad in new, divinely forged armor crafted by Hephaestus, a terrifying apparition of vengeance. His fury was a whirlwind, cutting down Trojans indiscriminately, his spear a blur of bronze. He pursued Hector, the slayer of Patroclus, relentlessly around the walls of Troy, a chase that became legendary, a desperate race for survival against an unstoppable force. The duel between Achilles and Hector was the climactic moment of the war, a confrontation between the two greatest warriors of their age, each fighting for honor, for their people, and for the memory of those they loved. Hector, though brave, was ultimately no match for the rage-fueled Achilles, who, guided by Athena, found the single vulnerable spot in Hector's armor. With Hector's death, the heart of Trojan resistance was broken. Achilles, in a gruesome act of grief and revenge, dragged Hector's body behind his chariot around the walls of Troy, a desecration that horrified even the gods. It was only through the intervention of Zeus, who sent Iris to King Priam, that the aged king was able to venture into the Achaean camp, guided by Hermes, and beg Achilles for his son's body. The scene of Priam kneeling before Achilles, pleading for his son's remains, was a moment of profound humanity amidst the brutality of war, a brief truce of shared sorrow. Achilles, moved by Priam's grief, relented, and Hector was given a hero's funeral within Troy's walls, a brief respite from the ever-present threat. Yet the war was far from over. Even Achilles, the seemingly invincible, was destined to fall. His vulnerability lay in his heel, the only part of his body not immersed in the river Styx by his mother, Thetis. When he was an infant, in a later battle, as Achilles fought valiantly, Paris, guided by Apollo, shot an arrow that struck Achilles in his heel, a wound that proved fatal. The death of Achilles, the greatest of the Achaean heroes, sent shockwaves through the Greek camp, a stark reminder that even the mightiest could be brought low. His funeral pyre burned brightly against the night sky, a somber beacon for the weary Achaeans. With Achilles gone, the Achaeans found themselves in a stalemate once more. The war had dragged on for 10 years, a decade of lives lost, resources depleted, and homes left yearning for their warriors. Troy's walls remained impregnable, a defiant symbol of resistance. It was then that Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, renowned for his intelligence and guile, conceived of a stratagem that would finally bring Troy to its knees. His plan was audacious, risky, and utterly brilliant: the Trojan horse. The Achaeans, under Odysseus's direction, constructed a colossal wooden horse, hollow within, large enough to conceal a contingent of their finest warriors. They then pretended to abandon their siege, burning their camp and sailing their ships just out of sight, leaving the massive horse behind as an offering to Athena, a supposed gift for safe passage home. A single Achaean, Sinon, was left behind, tasked with weaving a convincing tale to the Trojans. He claimed that the horse was a votive offering too large to be brought within the city walls, meant to appease Athena for the desecration of her temple by Odysseus and Diomedes earlier in the war. He further spun a tale that if the Trojans destroyed the horse, they would incur Athena's wrath, but if they brought it within their walls, it would bring them good fortune and make Troy impregnable. The Trojans, weary from years of war and desperate for a sign of peace, debated the fate of the enormous wooden beast. Some, like the prophetess Cassandra, blessed with foresight, but cursed never to be believed, warned against it, her frantic cries falling on deaf ears. Laocoon, a priest of Apollo, also urged caution, famously exclaiming, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." He even hurled a spear at the horse, but before the Trojans could truly consider his words, two massive sea serpents, sent by Poseidon, who sided with the Achaeans, emerged from the sea and devoured Laocoon and his two sons. This terrifying omen was interpreted by the Trojans as divine wrath for Laocoon's impiety, confirming Sinon's story and convincing them that the horse was indeed a sacred offering. With great effort and celebration, the Trojans breached their own formidable walls, pulling the colossal wooden horse into their city. That night, the city of Troy rejoiced, believing the war was finally over. Feasts were held, wine flowed freely, and the sounds of revelry echoed through the streets, a stark contrast to the grim silence that had settled over the city for so long. As the city slept, exhausted by celebration and years of conflict, the hidden Achaean warriors, led by Odysseus, emerged from the belly of the horse. They silently opened the city gates, signaling to the waiting Achaean fleet, which had returned under the cover of darkness. The ensuing destruction of Troy was swift and brutal. The Achaeans, fueled by 10 years of frustration and vengeance, poured into the city, setting it ablaze. The once proud city, its walls breached by its own hands, became a fiery inferno. King Priam was slain at the altar of Zeus, his long reign ending in tragedy. His wife Hecuba and the Trojan women were taken captive, their fates sealed by the conquerors. Aeneas, a Trojan prince, managed to escape the burning city, carrying his aged father Anchises on his back, and leading his young son Ascanius by the hand, destined to found a new lineage that would one day become Rome. The fall of Troy marked the definitive end of the Bronze Age in Greek mythology, a cataclysmic event that reshaped the world of heroes and gods. The war had been a crucible, forging legends and breaking empires. Historians still debate the precise historical basis for the Trojan War, while archaeological evidence, particularly the excavations at Hissarlik by Heinrich Schliemann in the late 19th century, revealed multiple layers of settlement, including one, Troy 7a, dating to roughly 1250 BCE, that shows signs of destruction by fire and warfare. It remains uncertain whether these findings directly corroborate the epic events described by Homer. Some scholars suggest the Homeric poems are a composite of many smaller conflicts and oral traditions, while others believe they capture the essence of a real, massive conflict that resonated through generations. Regardless, the tale of the Trojan War, its heroes, its tragedies, and its ingenious stratagem became a foundational narrative for Western civilization, a timeless story of pride, passion, and the devastating consequences of human conflict, echoing through the ages like the distant clang of bronze on bronze. The wind, once carrying the scent of battle, now whispers through the ruins, carrying only the faint echoes of a fallen city and the enduring power of its story. The winds that had once swelled the sails of the Achaeans, carrying them to Troy, now seemed to conspire against the very hero who had masterminded its fall. Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, found himself adrift on a sea far more treacherous than any battlefield. His journey home, a mere speck on the map, stretched into a decade-long Odyssey, a testament to the whims of gods and the resilience of a mortal spirit. The joy of victory, the shouts of triumph echoing from the fallen city, quickly faded into the stark reality of endless horizons and the chilling embrace of the unknown. Their first stop, the land of the Cicones, was a brutal awakening. Drunk on their recent victory, Odysseus's men plundered the city of Ismarus, ignoring their leader's pleas for a swift departure. The Cicones, reinforced by their inland allies, retaliated fiercely, driving the Achaeans back to their ships, leaving 6 men dead from each vessel. This early, costly lesson underscored the perils that lay ahead, a stark reminder that even heroes were vulnerable, and discipline was paramount. The sea, a fickle mistress, then swept them off course, a fierce gale blowing them for 9 days until they reached the shores of the Lotus Eaters. Here, a strange, intoxicating fruit grew, and those who tasted it forgot their desire for home, content to remain in a hazy, blissful stupor. Odysseus, ever vigilant, had to drag his men, weeping and protesting, back to the ships, binding them fast to the benches before setting sail once more. This encounter, subtle in its danger, highlighted a different kind of threat, the allure of forgetfulness, the temptation to abandon the arduous path of return for a life of languid ease. It was a test not of strength, but of will, of the enduring pull of hearth and kin. Their journey continued to the land of the Cyclopes, a race of one-eyed giants. Odysseus, driven by curiosity and a desire for hospitality, led a small party to a cave, unaware of the monstrous inhabitant within. This was the dwelling of Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, a brute who devoured men raw. When Polyphemus trapped them, sealing the cave with a massive boulder, Odysseus's quick thinking became their only hope. He introduced himself as Nobody, a clever deception that would later prove crucial. After getting the Cyclops drunk on potent wine, Odysseus and his men drove a sharpened, heated stake into Polyphemus's single eye, blinding him. The giant's roars of agony brought other Cyclopes to his cave, but when they asked who was harming him, Polyphemus cried, "Nobody is hurting me." The other Cyclopes, hearing this, assumed no one was attacking him and left. This act of audacious cunning allowed Odysseus and his surviving men to escape by clinging to the bellies of Polyphemus's sheep, as the blind giant let them out to graze. However, as they sailed away, Odysseus, in a moment of hubris, revealed his true name, taunting the blinded Cyclops. This act of pride proved costly, for Polyphemus, now knowing his tormentor, called upon his father, Poseidon, to curse Odysseus. The mighty god of the sea, enraged by the blinding of his son, would become Odysseus's relentless adversary, ensuring his journey home would be fraught with storms, shipwrecks, and endless delays. This moment, often debated by scholars, raises questions about the nature of heroism. Was Odysseus's revelation a fatal flaw, or simply an understandable burst of triumphant ego after such a harrowing escape? Perhaps it was both, a reflection of the complex human spirit. Their next destination was the floating island of Aeolia, home to Aeolus, the benevolent keeper of the winds. Aeolus, charmed by Odysseus's tales of Troy, generously gifted him a bag containing all the unfavorable winds, leaving only the west wind to guide them home. He warned Odysseus not to open the bag. For 9 days and nights, they sailed smoothly, the shores of Ithaca almost within sight. But as Odysseus, exhausted, finally umbered to sleep, his curious crew, believing the bag contained gold, opened it. Instantly, a furious tempest erupted, scattering their ships and blowing them all the way back to Aeolia. This time, Aeolus, believing Odysseus to be cursed by the gods, refused to help them further, turning them away with a heavy heart. The tantalizing glimpse of home, snatched away by the folly of his men, must have been a bitter blow, a cruel twist of fate that underscored the fragility of their hopes. The journey continued to the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of gigantic, cannibalistic people. Odysseus's ships sailed into a seemingly calm harbor, a natural amphitheater of cliffs. But as his men went ashore to scout, the Laestrygonian king Antiphates attacked them, devouring one of Odysseus's heralds. The giants then rained down boulders from the cliffs, smashing Odysseus's fleet and spearing his men like fish. Only Odysseus's own ship, which he had wisely moored outside the harbor, managed to escape, fleeing in terror, leaving behind almost all their remaining vessels and comrades. This encounter was a devastating blow, reducing his once mighty fleet to a single ship and a handful of survivors, a stark demonstration of the sheer, unpredictable brutality of the unknown world. From there, they reached the island of Aea, home to the sorceress Circe. Circe, with her enchanting voice and potent magic, transformed many of Odysseus's men into swine. Odysseus, however, was aided by the god Hermes, who gave him the magical herb moly, which protected him from Circe's spells. With Hermes' guidance, Odysseus forced Circe to restore his men to human form and to swear an oath not to harm them further. They stayed on Circe's island for a year, feasting and recuperating, but eventually, his men reminded him of their ultimate goal, home. Before they could depart, Circe instructed Odysseus to journey to the underworld, to consult the blind prophet Tiresias, who alone could reveal the path to Ithaca. But descent into the realm of the dead was a harrowing experience. In the shadowy depths of Hades, Odysseus performed the necessary rituals, offering blood to draw forth the spirits of the deceased. He spoke with the shade of Tiresias, who foretold his difficult journey, warning him of Poseidon's wrath and the sacred cattle of Helios, which must not be harmed. He also encountered the spirits of fallen heroes like Achilles and Agamemnon, and even his own mother, Anticlea, whose death he had not known. This encounter with the dead, particularly his mother, brought a profound sense of melancholy and reinforced the deep longing for the living world and the family he had left behind. It was a moment of deep introspection, a reminder of the personal cost of his long absence. Armed with Tiresias's prophecies, Odysseus and his men returned to Circe's island, where she offered further advice for the perils ahead. She warned them of the sirens, creatures whose enchanting songs lured sailors to their deaths on rocky shores. Odysseus, following Circe's instructions, stopped the ears of his men with beeswax and had himself tied to the mast, so he could hear the sirens' irresistible melody without being able to steer his ship towards their deadly embrace. He endured their beautiful, haunting calls, a torment of temptation that spoke directly to his deepest desires, a unique test of self-control. Next, they faced the narrow strait between Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla was a six-headed monster, each head with 3 rows of teeth, lurking in a cave on one side, while Charybdis was a monstrous whirlpool that swallowed and spewed forth the sea 3 times a day. Circe had advised Odysseus to hug the side of Scylla, sacrificing some men rather than risking the entire ship to Charybdis. It was a terrible choice, a no-win situation where loss was inevitable. As they passed, Scylla snatched 6 of Odysseus's men, one for each head, devouring them as they screamed his name. His moment, a horrifying spectacle, was a stark reminder of the cruel realities of their journey, where even the most cunning hero could not save everyone. Their journey continued to Thrinacia, the island of Helios, the sun god. Despite Tiresias's and Circe's stern warnings not to touch the sacred cattle of Helios, Odysseus's men, starving after a month of being windbound and running out of provisions, succumbed to temptation while Odysseus was asleep. They slaughtered and feasted on the sacred cattle. Helios, enraged, appealed to Zeus, who promised retribution. As they set sail once more, Zeus unleashed a terrible storm, striking their ship with a lightning bolt, destroying it and drowning all of Odysseus's men. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to a piece of the wreckage, tossed about on the waves. He drifted for 9 days, finally washing ashore on the island of Ogygia, the home of the nymph Calypso. Calypso, captivated by Odysseus, held him captive for 7 years, offering him immortality if he would stay with her. Though she loved him deeply, Odysseus longed for his home and his wife, Penelope. He spent his days gazing out at the sea, weeping, his heart aching for Ithaca. This long captivity, though comfortable, was a different kind of torment, a test of his unwavering fidelity and his enduring desire for his mortal life. It was only through the intervention of Athena, who pleaded his case to Zeus, that the gods finally ordered Calypso to release him. Hermes delivered the divine decree, and reluctantly, Calypso helped Odysseus build a sturdy raft, providing him with provisions and a fair wind. His journey on the raft, however, was not without peril. Poseidon, still nursing his grudge, spotted Odysseus and unleashed a furious storm, shattering his raft. Once again, Odysseus was plunged into the churning sea, facing certain death. But with the help of the sea nymph Ino, who gave him her magical veil to protect him from harm, he swam for 2 days and 2 nights, finally reaching the shores of Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians. Exhausted and naked, he collapsed in a thicket, falling into a deep sleep. He was discovered by Nausicaa, the young and compassionate princess of the Phaeacians, who had come to the river to wash clothes. She provided him with food, clothing, and directions to the palace of her parents, King Alcinous and Queen Arete. The Phaeacians, renowned for their hospitality and seafaring skills, welcomed Odysseus, though they did not yet know his identity. During a feast, Odysseus, moved by the minstrel Demodocus's song about the Trojan War, finally revealed himself, recounting his epic tale of suffering and survival. The Phaeacians, deeply impressed by his valor and resilience, promised to help him return home. They provided him with a magnificent ship and a skilled crew who sailed him swiftly across the sea, finally depositing him, still asleep, on the shores of Ithaca. 20 years had passed since Odysseus had left his home. His faithful wife, Penelope, had been besieged by a horde of arrogant suitors who had taken over his palace, feasting on his wealth and vying for her hand, convinced that Odysseus was dead. His son, Telemachus, had grown into a young man, struggling to assert his authority against the insolent suitors. Odysseus, disguised as an old beggar by Athena, began the arduous task of reclaiming his kingdom. He was recognized only by his old dog, Argos, who wagged his tail and then died, and by his loyal swineherd, Eumaeus, and his nurse, Euryclea, who recognized a scar on his leg while washing his feet. The reunion with Telemachus was a tender and emotional moment, as father and son finally conspired to reclaim their rightful place. The climax came with Penelope's challenge. She would marry the man who could string Odysseus's old bow and shoot an arrow through the holes of 12 axe heads. None of the suitors could even string the bow. Odysseus, still disguised, asked for a turn. The suitors mocked him, but Telemachus insisted. With effortless grace, Odysseus strung his own bow, a feat no one else could accomplish. He then shot an arrow cleanly through all 12 axe heads. The hall fell silent. Then, with a nod to Telemachus, Odysseus shed his disguise, revealing himself in his full glory. The ensuing battle was swift and brutal. With the help of Telemachus, Eumaeus, and the cowherd Philidius, and with divine aid from Athena, Odysseus slaughtered all the suitors, reclaiming his palace and his honor. The final test came with Penelope, who, still cautious after so many years of uncertainty and trickery, tested Odysseus by asking Heracles to move their marriage bed. Odysseus, knowing their bed was carved from the trunk of a living olive tree, rooted to the ground, became angry, explaining that it was impossible to move. This intimate knowledge, known only to them, was the final proof Penelope needed. She rushed into his arms, their reunion a culmination of 2 decades of longing, separation, and unwavering fidelity. The scars of his journey were many, etched not just on his body, but on his soul, a testament to the enduring power of home, family, and the human spirit's capacity to overcome even the most formidable obstacles. Odysseus had truly returned, a king and a husband, his Odyssey finally complete. The Great War was over, but for many, the true trials had only just begun. The wind, once a harbinger of battle, now carried the heavy scent of home, a scent yearned for through a decade of dust and blood. Yet the returns of the Achaean heroes were as varied as the constellations that wheeled above their ships. Some blessed with swift passage, others cursed by divine wrath, and still others finding their homes irrevocably changed, or even lost forever. Nestor, the wise old king of Perilous, was among the most fortunate. His ships, laden with the spoils of Troy, cut through the Aegean waves with surprising ease, guided by favorable winds and perhaps the quiet blessing of the gods who respected his piety and counsel. He reached his sandy shores without incident, his kingdom intact, his family awaiting him. His homecoming was a testament to a life lived with moderation and respect for the divine order. A rare beacon of peace in the turbulent aftermath of war. He would live out his days in Pylos, a revered elder, his halls filled with the echoes of Troy, recounted not with bitterness, but with the measured wisdom of one who had seen much and survived. Diomedes, the fierce warrior king of Argos, also enjoyed a relatively smooth return. He had been a favorite of Athena, and her favor seemed to extend to his journey home. His ships were spared the terrible storms that scattered so many others, and he arrived back in Argos to a kingdom that welcomed him. Yet even for Diomedes, peace was fleeting. His wife, Aegialia, had been unfaithful in his long absence, swayed by the machinations of Nauplius, the father of Palamedes, who sought revenge for his son's unjust death at Troy. Diomedes, ever the pragmatist, chose not to confront the betrayal directly. Instead, he quietly left Argos, embarking on new adventures, eventually settling in Italy, where he founded several cities, including Arpi and Argyripa, and became a revered figure, almost a demigod, among the local populations. His story became one of resilience and reinvention, a warrior finding new purpose beyond the familiar confines of his homeland. But for many others, the journey was a prolonged agony, a cruel inversion of the triumphant return they had envisioned. Menelaus, the king whose wife's abduction had sparked the entire conflict, endured one of the most arduous homecomings. His fleet, separated from the main body of the Achaean ships by a furious storm off the coast of Tenos, was scattered across the treacherous waters of the Aegean. He spent 8 long years wandering the seas, blown off course to Crete, then to Libya, and even as far as Egypt. In Egypt, he learned from the sea god Proteus how to appease the angry gods and secure his passage home. It was a journey of profound humility, a king stripped of his fleet, dependent on divine guidance and the kindness of strangers. When he finally returned to Sparta, his kingdom was still there, and Helen, having seemingly been purged of her destructive allure by the trials of war and wandering, was by his side. Their reunion was perhaps not passionate, but one of quiet resignation and shared exhaustion. They would rule Sparta together, their later years marked by a kind of weary peace, a life lived in the long shadow of their infamous past. The fate of Idomeneus, the king of Crete, was even more tragic. During a terrible storm, he vowed to Poseidon, and if he and his men reached home safely, he would sacrifice the first living thing he met. Tragically, the first to greet him upon his return was his own son. Though Idomeneus honored his vow, the act horrified his people, who, perhaps already weary of war and the king's long absence, rose up against him. He was driven into exile, forced to abandon his kingdom and seek refuge in Italy, a king without a throne, haunted by the memory of his terrible sacrifice. His story serves as a stark reminder of the often unforeseen consequences of desperate vows made in moments of peril. The homecoming of Agamemnon, the mighty commander-in-chief of the Achaean forces, was the most infamous and tragic of all. He returned to Mycenae, his grand palace, a conqueror, yet unaware of the dark web of vengeance that had been spun in his absence. His wife, Clytemnestra, had taken Aegisthus, Agamemnon's cousin, as her lover. Fueled by resentment for Agamemnon's sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia, at Aulis, and perhaps by a desire for power, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus plotted his demise. Upon his arrival, Agamemnon was welcomed with deceptive warmth, led to a bath, and there, while vulnerable, was brutally murdered by Clytemnestra, perhaps with an axe, or by Aegisthus, depending on the account. The details of the murder are gruesome, a shocking betrayal that reverberated through the ages. His death plunged the house of Atreus into a fresh cycle of violence, leading to the eventual vengeance of his son, Orestes, who would later kill Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, an act that would in turn lead to his own torment by the Furies. This cycle of blood and retribution, known as the Curse of the House of Atreus, became a central theme in Greek tragedy, explored by playwrights like Aesculapius in his Oresteia trilogy. Then there was Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, whose journey home became the subject of one of the greatest epic poems. His return was not merely difficult. It was an Odyssey in itself, a 10-year struggle against vengeful gods, monstrous creatures, and the siren call of oblivion. He lost all his men, endured years of captivity with the nymph Calypso, faced the wrath of Poseidon, navigated the treacherous straits of Scylla and Charybdis, and descended into the underworld. When he finally reached Ithaca, disguised as a beggar, his kingdom was overrun by arrogant suitors vying for his wife Penelope's hand and his throne. His long-suffering wife, Penelope, had remained faithful, weaving and unweaving a shroud to delay her decision. His son, Telemachus, had grown to manhood, yearning for his father's return. Odysseus, with the help of Telemachus and a few loyal servants, meticulously planned his revenge, culminating in the brutal slaughter of the suitors in his own great hall. His reunion with Penelope, after so many years of separation and trials, was a quiet, profound moment, a testament to enduring love and resilience. Yet even after reclaiming his throne, Odysseus was destined for one final journey, a penance for his deeds, to a land where men knew nothing of the sea, to plant an oar and make a final sacrifice to Poseidon, ensuring a peaceful death in old age. The aftermath of Troy, also saw the establishment of new foundations, both literal and metaphorical. As heroes scattered, so too did their followers, and new settlements sprang up across the Aegean and beyond. The nostoi, or returns, were not just personal journeys, but migrations that reshaped the early Greek world. Some of the lesser-known heroes, like Tlepolemus, a son of Heracles, founded settlements on roads. Philoctetes, the master archer who had been abandoned on Lemnos and later brought to Troy, eventually settled in Italy, founding cities like Petelia and Cremisa. These movements of people, often driven by necessity or the desire for a fresh start, contributed to the spread of Greek culture and influence across the Mediterranean, laying the groundwork for later colonization. The very concept of Greek identity began to solidify in the wake of the Trojan War. Before the war, the various city-states were often fiercely independent, even hostile to one another. The shared experience of fighting a common enemy, enduring the same hardships, and then facing the varied challenges of the returns, fostered a nascent sense of collective Greekness, of being Achaeans, united by language, customs, and a shared heroic past. This sense of shared heritage, though often challenged by internal strife, would prove foundational for the development of classical Greek culture. Late Greek civilization. Historians still debate the precise historical reality behind these epic tales. While archaeological evidence points to a devastating conflict at Troy around the late Bronze Age, roughly 1200 BCE, the fantastical elements of the Odyssey and the divine interventions described in the Iliad are clearly products of poetic imagination. Some scholars suggest that the stories of the nostoi might reflect the turbulent period of migrations and societal collapse that followed the Bronze Age, as established kingdoms faltered and new populations sought new lands. The Sea Peoples, a confederation of maritime raiders who caused widespread destruction across the eastern Mediterranean around this time, are sometimes linked to the chaos described in the hero's returns. Perhaps the tales of divine wrath and monstrous encounters were allegories for the very real dangers of sea travel, piracy, and the collapse of established trade routes. The enduring power of these stories lies not just in their adventurous plots, but in their profound exploration of human nature. They speak of the cost of war, the bitterness of betrayal, the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of love and loyalty, and the relentless hand of fate. The heroes, despite their divine connections, are deeply flawed, relatable figures, grappling with pride, grief, vengeance, and the longing for home. Their stories, passed down through generations, became the moral and cultural bedrock of ancient Greece, shaping their understanding of justice, honor, and their place in a world governed by both human will and divine decree. The echoes of their journeys, their triumphs, and their tragedies continued to resonate through the marble halls of Athens and the bustling ports of Corinth, a constant reminder of the epic origins of their world. The whispers of the gods, once resounding through the olive groves and across the wine-dark sea, did not simply fade with the rise of new empires or the dawn of different faiths. Instead, they adapted, transformed, and wove themselves into the very fabric of subsequent civilizations, leaving an indelible mark that continues to resonate even today. The Roman world, in particular, proved to be an eager inheritor of Greek myth, not merely adopting but subtly altering the pantheon, renaming deities, and reinterpreting narratives to suit their own cultural sensibilities. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera Juno, Poseidon Neptune, and so on, each retaining much of their Greek predecessors' domain and temperament, yet often imbued with a distinctly Roman sense of order, duty, or martial prowess. This syncretism was not a simple act of translation, but a complex cultural dialogue. For instance, while the Greek Ares was often viewed with a degree of ambivalence, a god of war who could be both valorous and destructive, the Roman Mars was revered as a foundational deity, father of Romulus and Remus, and patron of the military might that forged their empire. This shift in emphasis colored how these myths were perceived and utilized. Roman poets like Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, retold many Greek myths, often with a more detached, almost encyclopedic approach, yet always with an underlying recognition of their power and beauty. These retellings ensured their survival through the tumultuous centuries that followed the decline of the classical world. The philosophical schools that flourished in Athens and later spread across the Hellenistic and Roman worlds also engaged deeply with myth, often seeking to rationalize or allegorize the more fantastical elements. Stoics, for example, might interpret the labors of Heracles as metaphors for the struggle against vice and the pursuit of virtue, while Neoplatonists saw in the divine narratives profound symbolic truths about the cosmos and the human soul. This intellectual engagement helped to preserve the myths, not just as entertaining stories, but as repositories of wisdom and ethical guidance, even as new religious doctrines began to take hold. Even with the advent of Christianity, the old gods did not vanish entirely. Instead, they retreated into the realm of literature, art, and scholarly discourse. Early Christian writers sometimes demonized them, portraying them as false idols or malevolent spirits. Yet paradoxically, this very condemnation kept their names and stories alive. Others, particularly during the Renaissance, found inspiration in the classical forms and narratives, seeing in them a celebration of human potential and an aesthetic ideal. Artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo drew directly from mythological themes, bringing Venus, Apollo, and other deities to life on canvas and in marble, imbuing them with a new kind of immortality. The intertwining of myth with historical narratives became particularly pronounced in the ways ancient peoples understood their own origins and destinies. The Trojan War, for instance, a cornerstone of Greek myth, was often treated as a historical event, its heroes and battles serving as a foundational epic for Greek identity. Later, the Romans traced their lineage directly back to Aeneas, a Trojan prince who, according to Virgil's Aeneid, fled the burning city to found a new civilization in Italy. This myth provided a powerful, unifying narrative for the nascent Roman state, linking its destiny to the grandeur of the Hellenic past. Historians still debate the extent to which these founding myths were genuinely believed as literal history versus serving as powerful cultural narratives. Was Aeneas seen as a real ancestor or a symbolic one? The answer likely lies in a spectrum, with different individuals and eras holding varying degrees of literal belief. Beyond the grand narratives, countless lesser-known myths and local legends continued to influence daily life. The belief in nymphs guarding springs, dryads inhabiting trees, or satyrs frolicking in the woods persisted in rural areas long after the official state religions had shifted. These beliefs shaped agricultural practices, folk remedies, and even the layout of towns, with sacred groves or springs often becoming focal points of community life. The enduring presence of these localized myths speaks to their deep roots in human experience, connecting people to the natural world and providing explanations for phenomena that science had yet to unravel. The very language we speak bears the echoes of these ancient tales. Words like Atlas, Echo, Narcissism, and Herculean are direct descendants of Greek mythological figures and concepts, a testament to their pervasive influence on Western thought and expression. Even our constellations, those shimmering patterns in the night sky, are largely named after the heroes, gods, and creatures of Greek myth, ensuring that their stories are literally written among the stars, guiding sailors and inspiring poets for millennia. The study of myth also became a cornerstone of education, particularly during the Enlightenment and subsequent periods. Scholars, poets, and playwrights rediscovered and reinterpreted these narratives, finding in them universal truths about human nature, love, loss, ambition, and fate. From Shakespeare's allusions to classical figures to Goethe's Faustian bargain, the mythological framework provided a rich tapestry upon which new stories could be woven, demonstrating their timeless relevance. Even in modern psychology, the archetypes identified by Carl Jung, such as the hero, the wise old man, or the shadow, draw heavily on these ancient mythological patterns, suggesting that these stories tap into fundamental aspects of the human psyche. The enduring power of these narratives lies not just in their fantastical elements, but in their ability to articulate profound truths about the human condition, truths that transcend time and culture. The legacy of Greek mythology is thus not merely a collection of ancient stories, but a living, breathing influence that has shaped art, literature, philosophy, language, and even our understanding of ourselves. The tales of gods and heroes, once recited around flickering hearths and in bustling agoras, continue to resonate, whispering across the centuries, reminding us of the enduring human fascination with the divine, the heroic, and the mysterious forces that shape our world. The Parthenon may stand in ruins, and the oracle at Delphi may be silent, but the stories they once housed continue their journey, carried forward by every word, every image, and every thought they inspire.